Okay, so today on Meet the Storytellers, I'm delighted to introduce my guest who spent over 30 years in the storytelling industry. Her name is Nancy Duarte. She is founder of Duarte Inc. and based in Mountain View, California. So welcome, Nancy. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Ian. I'm excited to meet with another storytelling expert. It's always fun.
Well, you bet. And we should say we met in Amsterdam. I believe that was 7 years ago. So it feels like we've got a lot to catch up on. And maybe a good place to start, Nancy, just for people that don't know the kind of Duarte Inc. origin story. 1988 feels a very smart time to be getting into presentation design and storytelling. Where did the business idea come from? Where did it start?
Yeah, so we actually started as technical illustrator. So my husband is an artist by nature, and so the Mac for him was a new medium. And this was before design firms, real illustrators, they thought it was a toy and would never go anywhere. And so I came out of sales and strategy background, and I picked up the phone and started to call, and I called NASA, Tandem, and Apple in one afternoon, and we won accounts at all three of them. And people forget that back then, the way you made a chart was you had an X-Acto knife, black electrical tape, and you made your axes, and then you rubbed on, and so to show up and be like, we could do that in a computer and we can make quick modifications for you. That was like a big digital upstart thing back then. So it was so new. So we hit that window before like the people that were real craftsmen entered, and we slipped right in. And then obviously illustrations are a big part of presentations. And so then the rest is kind of history.
Wow. Well done on, sustaining it, being here so long.
Yeah,
There's a
that's the
great,
tricky part.
I was looking at your website earlier, and there's that lovely quote where you say that storytelling is the most powerful delivery tool for information, and I love that. So look, let's just start at the basics, Nancy. Why is storytelling so important in business presentations and communication? Why does it matter so much?
Yeah, I think storytelling attaches meaning to whatever you're saying. It gives it an emotional attachment between you and the audience. And now that we can hook up fMRI machines to the brain, we can see what the brain is doing while the story is being told, and all the sensing parts of the brain light up. My brain and your brain will actually tick at the same time in the same pattern, so the teller and the listener's brains are aligned. And it's a powerful structure. So you could use story like an anecdote, like actually tell a story, or you could actually frame your information in the shape of a story. And both are very influential and persuasive ways to communicate. It's powerful. It's just really powerful.
And part of that is the visual storytelling, right? So,
Yeah.
I started my career in the early 1990s. I remember going on PowerPoint training courses. I remember when PowerPoint presentations were those slides full of bullet points. And for me, Nancy, the eye-opener for me was when I went to South by Southwest in 2009.
Wow.
And most of the presentations I saw in the convention center there were just images. They were just slides with images on, no text. And of course, that's now something we're really familiar with. But for me, that was like, wow. Came back to London thinking this is what I need to do. And even that's only 11 years ago, people didn't seem to be having embraced that. So just unpack that visual bit, because I know that's very much part of Duarte's offering, that visual storytelling. Where does the visual come into it for you?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Slides used to be an actual trade when they were 35 millimeter slides, and then PowerPoint came out, and then everybody became a user, and nobody had a real best practice. And the work of Gar Reynolds in 2007, Slideology came out in 2008, and it was the first time, Slideology was the first time anybody had actually put a business case for why you should be conscious of how you're designing and the visuals that you're putting out there. And the phrase, a picture can speak 1,000 words, is true. The words you choose and the visuals you choose can make you either like your competitors or different from your competitors. And so a lot of the visualizing is a practice and a principle. So there's a visual thinking phase that happens before you choose to decide, what to express the visuals as. So if you think about Dr. King and the beautiful language he put in his I Have a Dream speech, very visual words, and those words were chosen very carefully. So if he had just shown a picture of the red hills of Georgia, it just wouldn't have been as beautiful. So visuals are the words you use, the metaphors, the pictures, the shocking, you can have even a shocking statistic can be something that is a visual that's very effective. So carefully choosing images and metaphors and sequences, and even how you reveal visuals over time can create a heightened sense of emotion and suspense and surprise. So it's a very powerful device.
So in a way, it's kind of like painting a picture, right? It's using that language where people can bring to mind.
If people can see what you're saying, they understand you. So make it really clear to see what you're trying to convey, and it makes everything more impactful and everyone more aligned.
Sure. Now, I was looking through Slideology, your first book. Got it here behind me earlier, and of course that was your first book, written in a time, the art and science of creating great presentations. That was written a while ago, and of course here we are in summer 2020 when we don't have the opportunity of standing on stage in a convention center to launch a new product or to talk to investors or do an all hands meeting. And I'm just curious, Nancy, about obviously, your business has had to change in the last few months as everyone else's, but how has that changed the advice you give business leaders and executives now we're in a kind of video medium rather than face to face? What needs to change as a result of the different medium there?
Yeah, I love that question. I think it goes back to empathy. So if it's an internal all hands meeting, I just don't think you should put a suit on and be all formal. People want to see sincere. They kind of want to see where you live. If it's internal, that you need to be equal to and on the same playing field as everyone else, and look in the camera, let people see your expressions, let them see what you're feeling. I think email memos are more difficult to send out because people will read intent and emotion into what you're saying. But if you actually deliver it over Zoom or over any of the tools virtually, it's more effective. What we're seeing on the flip side of that is the brands that are very dependent on product launches, on coming out strong. There's a real gap between the companies that are doing virtual events really spectacularly and the ones that aren't. Now, not everyone has budgets, so there's a way to have good enough production value and the content be solid. And then the other extreme is some of these are just, wow, beautiful. And because so much of the consumption of some of these events happens after the fact, some people are saying that this whole virtual thing has strengthened the after event experience for a lot of people. So you just have to really map to what your audience needs, more so after the fact than in the moment itself, making it really consumable.
So how might one, that's a great answer. So how might one do that after with like a product launch? What would that look like?
Yeah, so it's how you made it consumable over video. So even TED has done this for years. The TED Talk itself is amazing, but how they film it is with incredible intention. So it's all filmed to be consumed in a way that the users at TED.com can consume it. And the same goes for an event. You can have bells and whistles. You can have the person sitting way back or sitting way up close. But if you're doing something like a demo or showing code or all those things, you can't go for the bells and whistles. It has to be pretty pragmatic. So you have to think about who's going to consume this information. What needs to be coming out of their mouth? What needs to be on the screen? How do we make the verbal bites tight and sharp? Because what happens is, in a virtual situation, you're competing with their inbox. Their inbox is the biggest competitor to your content. They probably got one earbud sitting in there waiting for you to say something interesting. You say something interesting, suddenly they're out of their inbox and they're listening to you. So you have to have very intentional bits. Sometimes it helps to have a second voice, because every time anything novel happens, people will re-engage. So even just the novelty of a second voice going back and forth, they will, by nature, re-engage. Same with the visuals, like, oh my gosh, look at this visual, and then they'll be like, oh my god, I better go look at the visual, and they'll go and look at the visual. So there's ways to keep re-luring them back to the content to keep them engaged.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that. So having like a double header, maybe two voices presenting, is going to engage more than one.
Yeah, or even what they would call the voice of God, or the moderator, and then the main presenter. Yeah.
Got it. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Now, a theme in in fact, in all your work, is you kind of deconstruct presentations and you deconstruct famous speeches into this three acts of a story that people might be familiar with. Pixar and entertainment industry talks about the three acts of a story. And I'm just curious, Nancy, about how important you think that is, the three act of a story framework for people who are approaching kind of designing a presentation or putting something together right now. You know, how important is it that they have a framework that they should kind of craft the presentation or story on top of?
Yeah, every presentation should have a clear beginning, middle, and an end, and it's a shock how many don't even have that, where there's this moment where you establish the current reality. So a three-act story structure, all the way back to Aristotle, is there's this likable person and you're rooting for them. That's the first act. The second act is that person kind of goes through this season of either disillusionment, hardship, roadblocks, trials, enemies, right? And then the third act is they overcome that messy middle and they're changed. And that's the third act, is how they were transformed because of the trials they went through. And your audience is going through that same thing. Like, you show up, do I like them? Is this a likable person? And then you're taking them on a trip because you're trying to get your audience, trying to influence them in some way or persuade them in some way. So they're like, do I want to go on this trip with this person? Ultimately, when the presentation's done, hopefully they will be transformed. Perfect three-act story structure. The thing that was interesting to me is when I was looking at the greatest speeches of all times, I realized it had a rhythm and a cadence, and it had a story flair, or like bursts of story or something from story. And I wanted to figure that out. And what that became was my own journey through story, and the that rise and fall, the cathartic rise and fall, was what was creating that cadence and rhythm in the greatest speeches. So I figured out what that rise and fall was, which is the thing we love about story the most, and then kind of codified it into an actual structure that you could use to create your next great talk. That was Resonate. Love that. Love that. Yeah.
Well, I love that. Resonate, you know, has been a real great guide to me as I've gone on my own career as a storyteller. Cool. And I guess, as you've said, Nancy, at the heart of that three-act structure is that sense of transformation. Yeah. And I mean, I get that. It feels quite gettable when you think of a human character. It could be a business leader or a business founder going on that three-act journey and rooting for the hero. But what does that three-act structure look like? I don't know, for a product launch. You know, can that still work for a product launch? Is it about shining a light on a kind of customer archetype as the hero, or how might that apply to something like a product launch?
In a product launch, and in every presentation, your audience is the hero. So no matter who you're speaking to or what the situation is, that's why you have to adapt your own emotional energy and your content to whoever is in the audience. And so same goes for a demo, same goes for a product launch, whatever you're working on. And if you look at the greatest presenters, like I think Steve Jobs was one of the best, and I studied just his demos, and there's always a human involved. And the human that's involved, they know about it, like it's planned. It's like, oh, look whose photo is on my phone. And he scrolls through and it's all stacked up, all these great people. I'm going to call Starbucks, right? Well, someone was waiting at Starbucks to receive the phone call. So all of those were planned and designed and architected very carefully. And they all improved human flourishing, which is part of what story does, right? We go through these difficult times, but at the end, we're stronger for having gone through it. So demos are fun. Demos can be fun. Like we try to encourage our clients to do a day in the life. Like really think through, when this person gets up out of bed, where do they interact with our products until they go to bed, and how did it make their life better? Because that's what you ultimately want. Oh, my consumer was stuck, and I'm going to help them get unstuck. And that's the perfect shape of a product launch, right? You're stuck, insert this product or good, and your hero, which is your consumer, your customer, you're helping them get unstuck. And framing it in that narrative is amazing. And especially for software demos, I always encourage our clients to use really funny literary figures, or like really make it fun for the person to be like, oh my God, that was such a clever way to demo that. So at least keep them engaged as they go through the day in the life, and how one of your consumers or fictitious consumers could use your products. Story plays an important role in product.
Yeah, that's a lovely example. Steve Jobs, I think we can all remember some of those videos of those product launches. And I think another one in your book, as you mentioned, was it Bill Gates at TED, when he was talking about malaria and released some mosquitoes? I mean, both those things feel like a kind of almost like a bit of theater. I guess one needs to be careful with it, not to be kind of gimmicky. But, you know, do you think there's the opportunity, if you have the confidence, to be a bit playful with it, have that touch of theater? Like there is a reveal, there is some sense of surprise, or, you know, doing the phone call to Starbucks or whatever, you know, is, you know, or do you think actually, maybe if you're Fortune 500, you know, and you have the team and you have Duarte Inc. on board, maybe, but otherwise it's too risky. You know, what's your advice on that?
You know, I do think these bigger staged events, to your language, they're performances. They really are. And we call those moments something they'll always remember. It's a star moment, STAR, something they'll always remember. And to your question, does it always work? So I was there when Bill Gates released the mosquitoes, and I was sitting actually next to Gar Reynolds, and he's like, oh my, I'm getting bit right now. Like the mosquitoes were biting while he talks about malaria. Super effective. And then the next time he came to the TED stage, he talked about energy and oil, and he had lightning bugs on the stage. Well, we're like, well, just because the bugs worked the first time didn't mean that was necessarily going to work the second time, right? So that was kind of to me ineffective in the sense it worked the first time, but then why are there lightning bugs? Just because there was, you know. And so so it doesn't always work, and it can't be contrived, gimmicky, and it has to fit into the narrative and be a natural thing to have happened at that moment. But when there's something they'll always remember, they'll talk about it, they'll tweet it. And when you do one of these moments, you have to leave enough of a pause so people can grab a picture, they can make it look natural. But those are the moments that get pick up either in the press or online, and then people will leave and be like, oh my God, were you in the room where it happened? And that's what you want to be, right? Just like they say in the Hamilton musical, like, got to be in the room where it happened. And sometimes you have to be there to really experience how powerful those moments are.
I love that. They become legendary, don't they? They become the stuff of case studies in a Nancy Duarte book. So
yeah. So if you know someone does something cool, just call me and I'll put it in a book.
I will do. Just kind of drilling down a bit on this emotional engagement. A good story makes people care. And as you said at the beginning, you know, we now have the science to validate that. I'm just wonder if you've got anything else in your toolbox, any kind of, you know, secret sauce for getting that emotional reaction. I know sometimes there's a piece about vulnerability can help unlock that when you've got that kind of empathy with the audience, or you know, make yourself vulnerable. Any thoughts on getting that all important emotional reaction?
Yeah, I mean, empathy is the ultimate goal. Like, you need to have empathy, and story is a channel for all those other things you mentioned, like connection, like vulnerability, like connectedness, like bonding, like story, when you actually tell a personal story. So there's different types of stories, right? There's an I story, a we story, and a they story. I can tell an I story from a place of personal conviction about, and I went through this thing and it was hard and I'm changed. I'll never be the same again. I can tell that story. If I'm like, yeah, I knew this guy named Ian, and let me tell you his story, it's good and people could learn from it. But there's something about the vulnerability, the transparency of standing up and saying, I went through a messy middle and I'm different because of that. And these small little anecdotes that you could put into your larger information you need to convey are really potent and make you likable. Like, I'll follow a leader who's tried and fails and talks about it before I'll follow one who pretends life is easy, because it's not. And you know, they all fail.
Yeah.
And at least if they admit to it and shape how they learned from it and how you too can learn from it, it's really beautiful.
You bet. I'm always minded of that Richard Branson quote, which is, you know, a long list of successes does not make for a good story, you know, and having that human sense and talking about failure. Which brings me on to something else, which I'm really interested in, which is that intersection of our personal lives and our professional lives. I talked about it with other people on episodes of Meet the Storytellers, because here we are taping this interview. I'm in my home, you're in your home. We're seeing much more into each other's lives right now. And I'm really interested, Nancy, in those leaders who have really managed to talk about their personal stories, be vulnerable, all those things that you were just talking about, which builds empathy. And also, when you're the CEO of a massive, huge global corporation or a leader, it just makes you feel more real. And I'm thinking of Satya Nadella and the work he's done in his book, Hit Reboot, was it called? And also what he's done on his LinkedIn post, where he's talked about his personal side, and also Sheryl Sandberg, who of course, you know, was very open about dealing with grief and her husband passing and all those kind of things. And I just wonder whether, you know, I guess we never want to contrive those things because they're very sensitive by their very nature, but what's your take on, I don't know, someone standing in front of an audience or doing a video call, starting with a personal story in a professional context? Because if you've never done it before, it might feel quite terrifying to put down the mask and, you know, be open. I mean, any thoughts or tips on that?
Like, I like your language of pulling down the mask, because I think that's how people show up at work, right? With this pretend face on. And I don't know, your question was about, should you open with a story? And I think sometimes, like, depends on what the bigger construct is. As far as use of story, not everyone's comfortable with that. We worked with a public CEO here and in the Valley, and his team brought us in, and it's like, hey, all he does is like, and at my last company, I was awesome, and I did this, and I did that. I'm like, and you know, when he would tell a story, it was always like puffery. And they were like, people are just disconnected and we're really sick of hearing about his old job. And so we actually helped think through what's a story. He wasn't comfortable going straight to like Nadella or even Sandberg does, but he was like, okay, let me try this. And it was a story where he showed up at the company, like kind of back to skunk works thing that failed. And it was super safe, like super safe. His scores of that talk were off the charts, and he was swarmed. Just that little tiny insertion of this little tiny story. People were like, best talk ever, best talk ever. Like it was just so astounding. And now he knows, oh my God, this is like, wow, all I did was insert this very human side to myself. And so I think people just want to know that you're not all bravado and that you've tried and failed just like they have.
Yeah. That's a nice example. Thank you for sharing that. Just lifting the lid on Duarte Inc. So you have 150 people work for you, is that right?
Well, we have 111.
111. Yeah. Okay.
And we have a lot of contractors. But.
Sure. So just lifting the lid on your company and the culture of the company right now, and everyone's, you know, working remotely. I'm just curious about I mean, I'm guessing the answer, but how much storytelling is present in that culture in terms of, I don't know, how you build relationships, team spirit. I mean, do you have, now people aren't all together where they can gather in an all hands session? I mean, do you have any initiatives where you're trying to encourage people to share their stories about how they're dealing with lockdown or how they're navigating these times? Because I know from my own experience, the stories that are being shared and unearthed now inside organizations are really powerful at having that kind of shared sense of spirit. And so you know, how's that going inside the business, Nancy?
You know what, our values spell the word bliss, which is an important part of my own IP, and it's belong, lead, innovate, and serve. And so we were like, well, how do you belong and how do you serve in this kind of an environment? So story's been very important. Like the day we were told to shelter in place, the very next Monday we had a staff meeting. In the first 30 minutes, we told 5 stories of resilience from the other 5 crises the companies had gone through, and showed and reshared the values that were forged and formed, and then the story that formed them from each of the crises. And that week was spectacular. My team rose. So we had to flip a ton of workshops to virtual. And of course, when you're the presentation company, you can't just copy and paste. We had to deconstruct and reconstruct all the programs that we offer. And people were up till 2 a.m. just working their little patooties. Like, I don't think they would have showed up that way if they hadn't said, oh, wow, I work for a resilient company and we'll be okay. The cadence under which I communicate, I broadcast more on video. My cadence has picked up, but we have a lot of, to your point, events. We have what's called First Thursdays, where we all make together. And we have kind of cocktail hours all the time. We call it virtually social. And we have a bunch of virtually social. We had just all made tikis together. We all made tiki recipes, and then we had our pets. We showed some object. So everything we're doing has some, just a Duartian by their nature is a storyteller. So you pop in late to a meeting and everyone's telling a story of what either happened that day or the week before. And it makes you bond. It makes you strong. We're used to being in a building together. And there were a lot of people who did a 2-hour commute to come to that building because they liked the presence of others. So something does happen when you're actually physically in a room. I think your brain processes things differently. Like, on a remote call, it's like watching TV, right? But when you're in the room, you feel the people's presence. So we've spent a lot of time around what about a culture when they're present in the room is different than a culture that's completely remote? And we're trying to figure that out. And I'm telling you right now, if we weren't a storytelling culture, I don't know how we would be so knit together like we are right now. And then our symbol, like symbols are just as important. Our corporate symbol is a giraffe for a whole long story reason why. And one of the reasons is they have a heart larger than any other animal that walks the planet. And so my ops guy got the San Diego Zoo to have two guys that let us look at all the giraffes and ask them giraffe details. And the faces of the Dwartians were just like, and their kids, we invited families that was just like, so happy and could like actually talk to an expert about giraffes. And just moments like that we've built in to just remind us who we are, where we come from, and that we're going to get to the other side of this.
Oh, I love that. Some lovely examples. Thank you. And I mean, what drives you as the leader? It's been quite a journey. I mean, you've gone through a lot of technological changes in that time, since the slide carousels to where we are now. And obviously, you've scaled up. You're working with huge organizations and leaders all over the world. I mean, what drives you that you've still got that spirit, that you're still the founder of the company, you're still active? Because we know from a lot of business stories where, the founder might say, well, actually, I've done this for a couple of decades, I'm going to step back. So, what is it that's driving you still to be leading this company forward?
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't say being this old and all.
Not at all.
I have to keep my energy high. You know what Ian, it's seeing it work. It's seeing people communicate. It's seeing the spoken word make the invisible visible. It's seeing someone's whole life radically change, their business being built, their cause being solved. Like, it's just like it propels society, and there's just a lot broken right now, and I want the right messages to have the right clarity and build economy, build equality, and my goodness, like people who communicate well hold the keys to a kingdom, and I want them to use it wisely. And it really, it's not cliche. It's like we really want the great ideas to win. And we want to see 1 million people transformed in how they communicate. That's like our 5-year goal. And we set that right before COVID happened. And people on my team are like, we're still doing that? I'm like, yeah, we're still going to the moon. Like, it's that scene where they had to figure out what to do with only the parts on the rocket ship, right? I'm like, that's where we're at. That's where we're at in the movie. And it's going to be harder than we thought, but we really want to see people transformed and change how they show up in the world. And so I'm going to do this for a long time.
Great. Well, I love that mission, and good luck with that. Well, look, I better let you go in a minute and get on with your Wednesday. But before I do, I always like asking what kind of stories you're drawn to when you're not working. You have a demanding work life. What kind of podcasts or novels or journalism? What kind of things are you drawn to when you kind of switch off?
Yeah, I tend to still stick with either history, like even the podcasts will have either some sort of context or literature to them. I really love Masters of Scale. That's Reid Hoffman as an entrepreneur. So I listen to some entrepreneur ones. I listen to some about like just literature and more mind expanding kinds of things. And my kind of palate cleanser, which is just like dorky, and I probably shouldn't share, is I'll watch the Hallmark Channel movies. Like I could do email and be like, oh, okay. Oh, they miscommunicated. Oh, now they're in love, right? And it's just so repetitive. And then my husband sits next to me and I can hear him kind of choking. It's my favorite thing to have a husband that cries at Hallmark Channel movies. So that's my weird guilty pleasure. So that's how I roll.
Well, I love that. That's the power of story there, isn't it?
However
cheesy it might be, if it's tearjerker, it's got that emotional engagement, it's a winner. So, I love that. Look, thanks so much for spending time with me today. Followed you for many years and I have your books, but it's always a good sign when I've learned a lot as a storyteller today. So thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
It was fun. Thank you.